So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
The best for your baby is at thebesttoys.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship McLean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
WESN.
Good morning and welcome to AM Prime on WESN. I am Naomi McNish, and well, this morning we have a very, I think, grappling conversation, and we are having that conversation with Mr. David Abdullah, the political leader of the Movement for Social Justice. So this topic is one that it's an issue right now. It's the retrenchment of the CPEP workers done by Mr. Barry Padarath, the Minister of Public Utilities. And hopefully at some point in the conversation, my co-host Jada McLeod will be joining me. So until then, we will start. Good morning, Mr. Abdullah. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Naomi, and good morning to all the viewers. Thank you very much for having me this morning.
Yes, of course. So, I think we could jump straight into the conversation immediately with the CPEP retrenchment. You know, how do you interpret this, the timing and the scale of this move? I mean, it was over 10,000 workers that were retrenched.
Yes, so I will use a phrase to describe what seems to have happened, and that is that you should not throw out the baby with the bathwater. The incoming government, the new government, UNC, stated that they found, a certain amount of nepotism in that people who are friends or family of government officials, or some government officials, past government officials, of course, themselves may have had contracts. I heard Mr. Elder say that one local government councillor, for example, had a contract. So they also said so that's nepotism. That's not necessarily corruption, but that is nepotism. So you have to make a distinction between nepotism, which is favoring people or giving something that is not necessarily on the basis of merit, but is on the basis of party affiliation or family and so on. That's nepotism. Corruption is where monies are actually being fraudulently expended, in the sense that if you pay me to do a job and I am not actually getting that job done, then that is corruption, that is fraud. So they claim both nepotism, although they only say corruption, but what they've described so far is nepotism, but there may also be corruption. So in that, and they also said there's discrimination in that the contracts were primarily awarded, or the majority of contracts were awarded in what were then PNM held constituencies, and therefore there was not a fair distribution, and a number of other things in terms of how the program was being operated. All right, so of course not all of the facts have been put out by the government, but this is they've put a little dribbles out to justify the position. I think that how they went about it was throwing out the baby with the bathwater. In other words, the workers who were employed by the contractors were actually doing work, and they now, without any notification or anything like that, without a job. And of course, the 11,000 people who were CPEP workers are people who definitely need that income because they are, in fact, many of them single parents, single mothers. You see a lot of women in the CPEP program and men as well. And therefore, to deprive them of an income so abruptly is not a good thing. It's very bad. And you heard some of the stories, some of them being interviewed on the media, saying that, this was their only source of income, and they don't know how they're going to deal with it going forward. Now, we heard the minister then say yesterday, well, which wasn't said at the start, which is unusual. So you're now hearing them saying, well, the contractors are going to be paid according to their contract 1 month in lieu of notice, and therefore the contractors should now pay the workers 1 month in lieu of notice. But that then takes you just through July. It doesn't take you through August, and many of those workers now have children that they have to organize to get to school, so there's a whole need for income in the month of August so that they could address the needs of their children prior to school. And so it's a very bad time. We're also in the middle of, so that's what I'm saying, how it was done was throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You want to deal with dirty bathwater, then find a way of dealing with the dirty bathwater, but don't at the same time throw out the baby. And so I'm referencing in that statement that if there was dirty water with nepotism and corruption, you have to deal with that. But if you throw out the baby, namely the workers, then what you're doing is harming people's lives.
Yeah.
And that could have been avoided by a different approach. And interestingly, we're in the middle of the rainy season, and grass grows very rapidly at this time of the year. So if there's going to be no CPEP activity for a month or more, then, we're going to see it. We're going to see it very visibly all over the country. And so it wasn't a good time for this to be done, both in terms of workers' lives and just in terms of the general appearance and environmental.
Because I think it's just to understand why get rid of these CPEP workers now and then to hire a new set. But what is going to be, I'm trying to understand what would be the difference in hiring a new group of CPEP workers. Yeah. And then
contractors. Yeah, so what clearly could have been done is that, and as of course there's no board at CPEP, so it is the board that has to come up with the actual implementation of policy and policy itself on the basis of a general policy of the government. So what ought to have happened, in my view, is to have said, okay, we're going to put the board in place. That board will then have 2 to 3 months to work out a new approach, and so on. Contractors would have been given, say, 3 months notice that this is what will be taking place, that their contract will be terminated and may be renewed, but will be under review. And they may either be terminated or there may be continuation.
Yeah.
And so people would have a clear idea of what is taking place. The workers then will continue to be employed for 3 months. And during that 2 or 3 months period, the board would sit down with the executive management and go through, come up with a new approach to dealing with CPEP to make sure that it meets its real objectives. Yes? Yeah. And if that had been done, then everybody would have a sense of where am I going to be in 2 or 3 months' time. Now, the original idea of CPEP was that contractors would not be CPEP contractors for life. This was supposed to give small business people micro businesses an opportunity to start off in an activity and then be able to develop or evolve from there and then get contracts outside of CPEP so that they would not depend on that. And that has not happened in the way it ought to have happened. So clearly there's a need to refocus how the CPEP program is organized, but it should have been done in a completely different way. MSJ has particular suggestions about CPEP. Our view, for example, is that the workers themselves should form cooperatives and become the owners of the business, so they don't become simply employees, but they actually own through community cooperatives, and therefore you're creating now a greater sense of ownership and therefore a sense of commitment to the work that they're doing. And in that process of the workers doing that, training takes place so that their skill level gets upgraded. Some of them may have additional skills, but their skill level gets upgraded so that people now will be trained as craftspersons, tradespersons to do welding and plumbing and electrical work and masonry work and carpentry and so on. And therefore, their company, cooperative company, will be doing, yes, the grass cutting, but could also now be engaged in doing work to maintain other community facilities like the recreation grounds or other public facilities, so that if a community center requires or a school requires minor repairs, then you take on that community-based cooperative to do the work in their community. And so there's a whole sense of pride and community ownership of the resources. So it's not the government building or the ministry building, as the case may be, but it becomes a community building in a real way, or community buildings. And we are going to maintain those community buildings. And therefore there's pride and so on. And income, of course, comes in as a result of that maintenance work, so that people are not simply engaged in grass cutting, but doing other kinds of work. And that will give them additional income. So that is one of our proposals of how to reformulate it and therefore really make it a community activity. Mm-hmm. The second thing I want to mention is that the late Pat Bishop, and Pat Bishop was a tremendous person. We know her, of course, for conducting the Lydian Singers and being involved with steel bands, Desperados, and many other steel bands. Used to ask her to come and listen to the band before Panorama and give advice and so on. She used to be on radio providing commentary during Panorama on one of the radio stations. So we know her in music, but Pat, of course, was first of all an artist, a painter. But she was also a historian. That is when I first met her, she was lecturing at UE in history. So she was a historian, but very, very creative and always having a sense of what could be done to help people utilize their own creative abilities, their own skills. So she actually was working with CPEP during the time when Mr. Manning was Prime Minister for a short period, developing a program of skill upgrading for the CPEP workers. And she did a questionnaire, and she would have sent it out. It wasn't a questionnaire like a formal one, what skills do you have? Tick a box. The questions were like, what can you do? Can you cook? Can you sew? And so on. And then if you cook, what can you cook? Do you make anything? Those kinds of things like that. Right. Because what she was going to do is to use that information and then help those persons upgrade their skills so that they could eventually become, have set up a small business doing food processing, or engaged in other kinds of skilled work. And that was a very interesting program. And unfortunately, it came to an end sometime after 2010 when the partnership government came in. I wouldn't give all the backstory to that because I was well aware of a lot of the backstory, but that was a very unfortunate development. So, when I'm hearing stories about we have to upgrade the skills of people and that kind of thing, That was on the cards. Pat Bishop had started that work more than 15 years ago, and then it came to an end under, interestingly, the People's Partnership Government.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that have to be done. And I just remember Pat Bishop, and her efforts, more than 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to take a quick pause and welcome Jada to the conversation. She's here.
Good morning, viewers. Good morning, Mr. Abdullah. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm very well. I hope you're doing well. There was a lot of traffic this morning, I suppose.
Too much. And I myself was driving, and it was a lot.
Okay, I hear you.
Actually wanted to introduce another part of this conversation. We were just reading the Newsday, and what came down was PNM alarmed over reforestation program shut down with 4,600 more workers fired. That came out today, where I think it was the exact number, 4,608 workers and contractors from the National Reforestation and Watershed Program were fired. This comes after the CPEP retrenchments. Can we talk about that a little bit more? Is the government trying to, as you were kind of suggesting before, renew some of these programs, look into it? What are they trying to do?
I can't say. I mean, the Minister of Agriculture, I suppose, I know whose portfolio this falls, will have to identify precisely the reasons for this. And again, if you want to roll out a new program or reform it, then you have to first of all have very clearly that reformed plan ready for implementation, and then you make the changes rather than abruptly stopping it, and then you have a gap while you're trying to work out exactly how you're going to reformulate it. Now, I have engaged, I used to engage with a number of people involved in that reforestation program. There was a group down in Rio Claro area that I met with many moons ago, I don't remember how many years ago, when they at that time had been threatened with a similar type situation. I don't remember under which government it was. And I know that someone who is well known to many people, Akila Jayamogli, who has the Fonzerman's reforestation program in St. Anne's, outside Port of Spain. She is very active in that program as well in her community, and I think she also links with other contractors. I know she at one time had reached out to me as well because her contract had come to an end. So this program is an important program because
It is.
For several reasons. During the dry season, of course, we have a lot of bushfires, and when you get those bushfires, many trees are destroyed, and therefore you need to replant in order to have soil preservation. It uses water conservation and a whole range of things like that. And there are other areas where we need to engage in reforestation because we can't afford to lose a lot of forest cover for very clear environmental reasons. And so it is an important program. How it is organized and who gets contracts, again, I'm not absolutely clear on how that is done, but these ought to be community-driven projects. In other words, you don't want to bring a business contractor from town to do a reforestation program somewhere up in the central range, as the case may be, or down in Moruga. So these need to be community-based activities. And I come back to the idea that there should really be community-based cooperatives so that it's not just workers being employed, but workers owning the cooperative, and that cooperative then engaged in the program of reforestation in their own community. And that is how MSJ views it going forward. So we not only critique maybe how things are done, but we also try to offer specific policy alternatives that are sustainable and that will benefit people in a real way. And shift the culture that, well, you get a job for a little while and then you're not sure if you're going to have a job when the government changes, but that we have community cooperatives which are not based upon party politics or anything like that, but are really based upon the interests of particular communities.
Yeah, I actually want to make a point. When we see things like this happen, and then and go back to elections, right? When UNC kind of had their whole campaign, and
they ran on labor.
Yeah, they said, you know, there will be jobs, however many more jobs open to people, not that so many people would lose jobs, because that's what's happening now, and we haven't seen anything where jobs have been opening up for persons. But
even if they're doing a stop and start where they stop the program and we're suggesting that maybe they're going to restart with new people or whatever, first of all, there's no communication. We heard from many people, these CPAP workers and some of the reforestation program workers, that no communication was given to them. And previously, they were just told not to return to work. You don't have a job because of some clause in your contract. How is that fair to people? And even if we're saying, what I think is a bit idealistic, I don't think it's unrealistic, but idealistic to think that we can have community programs, as Mr. Bueller was suggesting. But you can't have that with people out of work right now. People need money.
And a good point you made, Mr. Abdullah, you know, in terms of how they went about it, because like you said, if you're doing something like this, then your plan or you know, how you assess the situation should be readily available. And this is something that we as the public should be able to see or witness and to understand what's happening. And you're accusing the previous government of so and so and so. So show us,
even
because
goes into your Tuesday talks of stuff. Go ahead.
Yes, and so, you know, it seems as if the approaches to deal with, if you want to deal with corruption, so let me put it the other way around. You want to deal with corruption, then there are certain things that you have to do. But there's a way of going about it that will ensure real change, because the UNC itself had its own experience in government where, you know, issues were raised. I mean, for example, many people may forget, but prior to the 2015 elections, a lot of CPEP contracts were awarded in the same way, and the UNC government did a lot of things just prior to the 2015 elections, the same way the PNM government did things just prior to the 2025 elections. So governments do those things in order to use their state power to their benefit politically, okay? And it's not peculiar to one party or the other. It's something that needs to be changed. That culture has to be changed, of state power, access to government resources, then being seen as a means to sustain political activity of your political power over time. And so if you look historically at budgeting, maybe not in this last budget cycle, but over the years, going back way back into the 60s, every budget just before an election tends to be higher in expenditure. There's a peak in expenditure. Why? Because government's going to spend more money in the year of an election. Roads get paved. We all know that story, right? Roads get paved, and so on and so on. People get hired, all in an effort to try to say the government is working and to win support and to win votes. All parties have done that in the past. So we need to have, if we want to therefore have significant change, we have to build in different systems and mechanisms. Take, for example, state boards. State boards go out when a new government comes in, and then there's nobody to approve expenditure over a certain amount. We may have to go to the permanent secretary in a ministry, or as the case would be, because a management, normally with procurement, a manager in the company cannot approve an expenditure above a certain limit. So a lot of things then become problematic if you have 2-3 months without a board in place in a state enterprise. So MSJ's position, again, I like to put forward alternative ideas. MSJ's view is that state boards should not be, or the directors on boards, their term of office should not be the same as that of a government. We need to have a certain amount of continuity. And also, they should not be political appointees, because you get this situation where a large section of the country, that skill base of a large section of the country is not being utilized in our national affairs. And we don't have a large skill base. We only have 1.4 million people or whatever, and some of them are children. So we don't have a large skill base. Not everybody has technical and professional skills or experience. And therefore, when a government changes, you almost lose a significant number of your skill base, because the new government, whichever one it is, then says we're not going to appoint anybody who is either is or perceived to be a member or supporter of the party that opposes us. And therefore we lose that whole skill base for the country, and we can't develop in that way. So our view is that particular organizations, civil society organizations, or trade unions, if there are 80 state enterprises or whatever, unions should put forward 80 names. The business organizations put forward 80 names. The accountants, 80 names. The law association, 80 names. So we then get a pool, women and so on, and youth put forward names. So the government then has, the cabinet has a pool of people who have been nominated by civil society organizations. So this is not now based on party or whatever, but based on their interest and who they think is appropriate to serve on boards. And people whose names go forward will then see this as national service rather than as having some kind of loyalty to party A or party B. And so when the government chooses from within that pool, you then have, a real sense that Trinidad and Tobago is unified behind the development of the state companies, and therefore behind the development of Trinidad and Tobago as a whole. So that's one element of changing how state board governance operates. The second element would be that, like a private sector company that is on the stock exchange, and you see Republic Bank or whatever, you would see in the newspapers that 3 directors are going to retire at the end of at the upcoming annual general meeting of shareholders, and 3 new persons are being nominated to fill their position. So, and 4 directors will be continuing after this AGM. So there is both renewal and continuity at the same time. And so when a government changes, the baby doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater. In other words, the new board doesn't come in and say that everything the previous board did was a waste of so-and-so time, and we're going to restart everything, and so on and so on. Because every time you do that, the organization doesn't grow, because you're not building on what happened before. You're stopping and maybe dismantling what happened before and starting all over again. And we can't go that way. We have to build in continuity and as well as renewal. And in that situation, the permanent secretary or a senior public official can be on the boards, and therefore government policy will be channeled through that person to the board. And the boards will be aware of government policy. So not that the governments are going to be rogue elephant boards, but clearly we need a certain kind of coming together of our human resources on boards. And if you had that type of situation, you would not now be getting what is happening with CPEP or wherever. Yes, and so you do need to disrupt the status quo. You got right. So that was the topic that I had for Tuesday Talk 2 nights ago. So we do need to disrupt the status quo, but what a new government seems to do is try to disrupt the status quo of the previous government. So the PNM came in 2015, they wanted to disrupt what the UNC had done before. UNC comes in 2025, they want to disrupt the status quo of the PNM. What we need to do is disrupt the status quo of the structure and way in which decisions get made in this country. That is what we need to do, and that means fundamental change. If you want to deal with corruption, you have to deal with what the Financial Intelligence Unit, I still have the newspaper next to me in my study. I just put it up. This was the Sunday Express, right? Financial Intelligence Unit, $8.9 billion in suspicious reports. But in 2024, but only $2 million of that was led to actual charges. So So we don't deal with corruption in this country in a real way. If you want to deal with corruption, then this parliament must pass, which the last parliament had before it for 5 years, the legislation to deal with campaign and party finance law. Because, you know, you hear one party talk about the financiers and the financiers benefiting or the 1% benefiting and so on. Well, the way to deal with that is to make sure that big financiers are known to the public. How much money did this company give, this individual give? Because those parties, both of them, spent a lot of money in the last election.
It's always been weird to me that we didn't know many of who those people. I mean, we could speculate, but it was always been weird to me that there wasn't like a public site, you know?
Yeah.
Something on EBC maybe, I don't know. But
and you know, it came out once, right? And then because there was a court matter between Jack Warner and the owner of SIS about how much money SIS contributed to, I think, the 1995 campaign of the UNC, the 2007 campaign of the UNC, and there was a court matter, and one person said it was 30-something million, the other person said it was 15 million, one person said it was a loan, one person said it was a donation, and so on. And so that was just one company or one individual in one election campaign. You hear the kind of money that was being floated about.
The outsider. I'm saying you made an interesting comparison to the US under Trump, where disruption was promised, but it ended up reinforcing the same, at this point, billionaire, trillionaire class. So do you see like a similar pattern happening here in Trinidad and Tobago?
One will have to see, and it's interesting you asked that question just after I made the point about the financiers. So we will have to see in, you know, as things roll out, who is really going to be benefiting from the changes that the government is making. At the moment, the persons who have lost in the short term are the workers,
exactly,
and others. Yes, hopefully the government will move quickly, not just to give them social grants to tide them over, which is what we heard, but to ensure that those 10,000 people have employment, because that's what they want. They want a job. They don't want handouts. They want a job. And interestingly, you know, what the CPEP job does for especially women, it enables them to work in the morning. And of course, people say they should work longer hours. But I just ask those of us who work in air-conditioned offices and drive air-conditioned cars and so on, to spend more than 4 or 5 hours in the hot sun at any one time. You can't sustain that.
Yes, but it's also a very important job. It's a community-based job, because when you walk out of your street, you're walking out in the morning, you're seeing the workers there. You get to say good morning, you get to know them.
Even when you come here on a morning, you see them in front here.
Exactly.
But I'm being honest, a lot of the times when I did see them in front of our building, they were sitting down, talking with each other. You know,
some people tend to see, but I mean, it's not like they don't work. I mean, you see the fruits of their labor wherever you go. Maybe it's just not all the time that they're working. But the point I'm trying to make is that it builds community. It's something so almost central or intrinsic with Caribbean community or Caribbean culture that I think it's why would you do away with it?
Because especially in your own community where you live, you see them. You tend to form a relationship with them because you see them every morning or certain mornings of the week, and like I remember seeing CPEP workers in front of my house on my street, and you will, as you drive by, you talk to them, you give them a bottle of water, something. It does build community. But I know one of the points that Mr. Padrath was making, and he said this multiple times in different ways, and he accused the PNM of prostituting the CPEP and using the program as a slush fund to benefit senior party officials, right? And so my question then is, do you think that CPEP became a political tool, in your opinion, based on what we've been seeing and the things that we've been hearing?
I think that not just CPEP workers, but also URP workers and many others who are in relatively insecure work have been used by both parties over the years. So let me just say that, both parties at various times would have said to those workers prior to elections and so on, you better come out to the election campaign meeting, we're organizing transport, you get a jersey and that kind of thing. Otherwise, you may not have a job. And we've heard anecdotally that both parties in different times have used that approach. And so it's very unfortunate that people who are in insecure employment, who are vulnerable, get used and abused by those who control political power in this country. Yes? So that is an unfortunate type of culture which has to be changed. And this is why I'm saying that we need to reformulate it so that the workers become owners of the business and are really able to sustain their activity, not only in terms of what they do now, but in terms of bidding for contracts or doing work for like community centers and things like that to do maintenance work, and then be able to bid for contracts in the private sector as well. And therefore we strengthen and nurture them, and they're not then open to being exploited by any political party or by any individual person who thinks that they can have power over those workers. So that has to change. Yeah, that has to change.
The government also would have promised, because I know we were talking about how they went about dealing with this issue, and the government would have promised a more transparent contractor registration process. So I think this is something that they are now working on, right? And obviously I still cannot agree with firing all these workers and just to put out a new registration process. I mean, things could have definitely been assessed better and handled better. But with that, do you think that this whole new contractor registration process that they're trying to put together would be just come like putting a new label on the same problem, because then we still, I think, because I don't think they're gonna rehire every person that was fired. I mean, when we look at the articles, you see, I know the news, they would have interviewed a few people, a few workers that who were affected, and they talk about their personal life and who's rebuilding their home and has a 2-year-old to raise, who got, and the stories are, they're hard to read, they're hard to listen to. And you see these potential for reform, some sort of reform within the CPEP. And so your thoughts on that? Do you think that it's just putting a new label on the same problem when it comes to the new contractor registration process?
Yeah, and you're right, Naomi, in the sense that this is what I'm saying, what I said earlier, there could have been a transition period. So the existing contractors could have been said, okay, there's going to be a whole review, we're going to come with new criteria for registering or having contractors register, and criteria for them getting hired as CPEP contractors, and that process will take 2 to 3 months. And so the existing contractors would re-register or register as the case may be. New contractors may also register. But we need to do it on the basis of some kind of data-driven thing, so that the program was really identified, as I mentioned earlier, to do 2 things. One, for contractors, small business people, to be able to get a leg up, to get a start in business. But it wasn't meant for them to continue all the time. So you don't want a situation now developing where a whole set of other contractors register who have maybe very, good, strong businesses. And so you replace people who need to transition, need that startup, and so on. You also don't want a situation where you have a CPAP contractor who's been there for 20 years, because that was not the purpose of having that. That CPAP contractor should have, in the last 20 years, moved on from doing business as a CPAP contractor to go into other kinds of businesses, yes? So those are the things that we need to do. You don't then want to have somebody who has 4 backhoes and 2 excavators and that kind of thing, and is doing other kinds of work to now become a CPAP contractor and say, well, that now is equity, because that isn't, because that person has an ongoing business earning income and doesn't need the income from a CPAP contract, yes? So it has to be transparent. We also have to say, okay, what is the unemployment rate in a particular constituency or particular regional corporation? And therefore, if you have a high unemployment rate, you would then have to say, okay, we may need more workers in that area. But then the question would be, what work could they do? Because if you're talking about an urban community, what are those CPAP workers going to be doing in an urban community as distinct from an area that has, say, a lot of roads that require the grass growing up on the side of the roads, that require constant cutting, and so on and so on. So those are the kinds of things that we have to think through properly when you're developing policy. And then the issue then is really, how does a government ensure that it creates in Trinidad and Tobago, or facilitates the private sector to create large numbers of sustainable jobs or sustainable businesses, new businesses, so that you don't need to have as many people employed in a program like CPAP or URP. A lot of, I've worked with a lot of communities, and people on the block will say, we really don't want a URP job, which is once you get work every couple fortnights and so on, which is very insecure, low pay, and it's not consistent. That's not what we want. We want decent work. So the question really has to be, how do we generate decent work for everybody, or decent incomes for everybody, based upon people being able to start up their own small businesses. Not everybody could have a small business that is going on micro enterprise that will be successful.
And one of the stories I want to highlight, and just so we could make reference to this, there was a man, he's been a CPAP worker for over 25 years, and he's 50 years now, right? So his concern now is that at his age, he's not going to get another job, right? But when reading his story, considering the fact that he's worked in CPAP for 25 years, right? So he has nothing to do with the
past political party,
the previous government. He would have been there since
Adam was a little boy, as my mom likes to say.
He would have been there since UNC was in government before. So it just kind of shows how many more people like him, and the retrenchment occurred without proper consideration. So I also see here, Mr. Padrath, he would have stated that this retrenchment was to target the contractors, not the workers, right? He said it was for the contractors who would have been not properly
didn't go through the hiring process properly.
that didn't go through the process in the right way, and it was not meant to affect the workers, right? Because we're seeing people like this now, and I think this is a story that it has to be specifically spoken about, and I'm sure there's multiple people like that.
Yeah, that's why I come back to what I said. My analogy earlier when I started off. So if you want to deal with the contractors and not the workers, that the contractors are the bathwater, and the workers are the baby. And what has happened is that in throwing out the bathwater, the baby was thrown out, and you can't do that. So it's common sense. Don't
you
throw
were
out the baby with
supposed to
the bathwater.
if we're using that analogy, then we were supposed to kind of get a sifter or something of the sort to kind of strain it out and still save the babies.
So I'm actually going. Go ahead.
And if I could use another analogy, there's the old saying, that the grass is growing, but the cow is starving, right? So with CPEP, grass cutting, we're going to see a lot of grass being cut while people are going to go hungry.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing here some comments. I like to go through the comments sometimes when the Newsday would post certain stories. So they were talking about how people are they're being taken, the CPAP jobs, the government jobs are being taken away, but what about jobs in the actual government? When we go to a government institution, we can clearly see that they are understaffed. So why is it, I don't know if there's some kind of correlation here, these amount of workers that are being given these URP jobs, these CPAP jobs, reforestation program jobs, is there any way we can reskill them so that they can go into government institutions, they could work in licensing, for example, because they're horribly understaffed and many other government institutions. Do you think there's a correlation there?
Yes, and we were talking about that a little earlier, Jada, about the need for people to be reskilled. I was giving the example of Pat Bishop, more than 15 years ago, when she was developing a program in CPEP to enable people to upgrade their skills, largely for them to start their own businesses. And so they could have been working in the morning on the CPEP program, and in the afternoon they could then work in their kitchen, making guava jam or guava cheese or whatever, or engage in sewing or carnival time, being working as seamstresses for the carnival bands and so on and so on and so on, making mass costumes. So that is one level. But you're right. Another aspect of it should be training. In fact, I remember when I was, my memory now, I have to search my memory banks. I look up to the ceiling to try to see if I could stimulate my mind. I remember when I was chairman of Cipriani College, we were talking about doing a program with groups like CPEP to enable them to have those workers upgrade their skills. So they could have come in for some basic training, could have been in occupational health and safety, or it could have been in security management, cooperatives, and so on, and other areas that could have enabled them to upgrade their skills. And Cipriani had a program, I suppose it's still there, where if people are coming in and they don't have the requisite CSEC passes, we had a program of remedial type education that would have enabled them to access that level of education that the college was providing. So that is something that could be done, programs of training and retraining, so that those who might want to go into different kinds of fields could get the opportunity to do so, not necessarily in terms of craft or manual type activity, but also different skill levels. And so those things are possible, but that is what you do when you sit down and you think about the problems in a holistic way and then train people. In other words, some of them may be very good creatives and therefore could be engaged in developing software and IT applications and so on. They don't have to have had a previous background. A lot of young people are very good with using their phone and doing all kinds of stuff like that, and could become very creative and earn money in that way. So yes, training could take place. And that's why I'm saying that what we need to do essentially is to ensure that fewer and fewer people required to work in programs like CPEP. We still need that because we still need to have, the environment dealt with in terms of grass being cut and drains being cleared, and at carnival time that the garbage is cleared up within hours every evening and so on. So that activity still needs to take place, and that is valuable work. And perhaps we undervalue in terms of remuneration the work that those people do. We value it when we drive and we see the place looking nice, but we don't put up a price to that and say that really those people should be paid more for our general environment and sense of well-being, to be in a positive frame of mind.
So, I mean, I like where you're going with it. We do need more, community building, community involvement. And as you said, your point there when you were talking about the grass still needs to be cut. can we ask? I mean, I know you wouldn't have the answer, but can we ask what was the rush? You know, I think that's where I'm kind of stuck on, because even if you want to revitalize the program, which is fair, that's no problem, that's new, that's the energy, that's the what we want from you. But you're hurting people in the process, and you decided to give out social grants. But how effective is that going to be? How is that going to be maintained? Those things are hard to maintain, especially if you're doing it in the short term. So I just find there's so many issues with what was done and how it was done. And it's affecting people in a very negative way. These are people that are so unskilled, they're not making a lot of money. So the little that they got, it's to tide them over,
Yeah, and then the cost of the grants might be even more than the amount of money they're paid every month, yes?
That is a good
so,
point.
That's why I'm saying you need to, excuse me, you need to think the thing through properly. And therefore, this is why I said that there's a new approach to management change or change management, we were speaking about on Tuesday evening, that where the previous change management was you engage everybody must be involved in discussing on the change and so on, so that people buy in and own the change, and therefore the change process takes place smoothly and there's less resistance, because there's always resistance to change. So you want to minimize resistance to change by getting people involved, and therefore they feel comfortable with the change and see where they are in the process and where they are in the organization and what their future will be. So that has been one way of change management. But then you have a new approach, which is disruption. And therefore, the way to do it is shock and awe, that you hit everybody hard without warning and so on, so people don't have time to process everything, and therefore people feel a sense of helplessness and weakness and so on, and powerlessness, and therefore you ram through the change. That certainly was the Trump 2.0 against the background of their, what was it called, Project 2030 or whatever they had, which Trump disavowed, but clearly was developed as policy measures that they would implement once Trump became president. And also, of course, Elon Musk with the Department of Government Efficiency. So they went in and just said, okay, everybody out, firing everybody, and so on, and shocking everybody. And it was very, very difficult for people to resist that. And of course, what that did was to weaken important regulatory bodies, in the case of the United States, like the Environmental Protection Agency and other regulatory bodies. And therefore, that would give big capital more power because they're less regulated, which is what they want. They don't want to be regulated. But that's a different scenario from ours. Ours, it seems as if, so the drain the swamp was in relation, what Trump was saying was in relation to that. In our situation, as I said, for the UNC, their disruption or their change is really changing out what they perceive to be centers or bases of PNM support or PNM power and that kind of thing. But that does not change necessarily the structure of power and decision making in the country. It doesn't impact upon the multinational corporations that are making billions of dollars of profit. It doesn't impact on the big conglomerates of Massey and Answer McCall and Prestige Holdings and Agostini, who are making millions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases in profits, or the big banks. It doesn't change who the big contractors are, who are going to get all the jobs to do the road paving, regardless of which party is in power, to do the road paving and that kind of thing. It doesn't change who the big importers of food are, yes, and therefore our expenditure on foreign exchange on food. You're giving out laptops to children, which is fine, but what I saw in Venezuela myself, when I saw President Chavez in Venezuela giving out laptops, this was years ago. This was about 2012 or thereabouts, 2013. What before, because he died in 2012 or 2013, so this was before that. What he was doing was saying that not only we're giving laptops, but we are manufacturing these laptops in Venezuela under license for a company, yes, but we're manufacturing them. So we're creating a certain value added here in Venezuela. But more than that, all these laptops now are loaded up with software and information about the history of Venezuela and so on, so that when students get it, it's not just a tool for them to use for their classes, but it is also a means of ensuring that information and education about who we are as a people is shared and made available to young people. So therefore, you're building a sense of the nation and a sense of civic responsibility in children by the laptop. So that is a different approach to giving out laptops. So I just mentioned that. So, you know, we if we want to bring about real change and disrupt the status quo, we need to disrupt the status quo of information or misinformation and so on, which leads to conflicts within our own society, you know. And you know, one conflict which is kind of simmering is the decision by the government to give a national award to the visiting Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Modi. And sections of the Muslim community have come out and said we are unhappy about it. Not that we don't respect the fact that Prime Minister Modi is the duly elected Prime Minister of India, and therefore a visit, official visit, is well within the remit of Trinidad and Tobago government and the government of India to have. That's a normal thing. But to give him a national award is something slightly different because there are things about his track record which are not positive. That's what the Muslim community are saying. I haven't made a public comment on it, but I think people are well aware that there are conflicts in India that we could well do without here in Trinidad and Tobago, given our own multicultural, multi-religious society.
One of the things that you would have mentioned in the Tuesday talk would have been the Second Republic. So I just wanted to ask if you can unpack that a little bit and explain what does the MSJ mean by the Second Republic, and you know.
Yeah. So I did a TED talk some years ago. I think it was 2019, and I was essentially trying to get that concept across through that TED talk, and I said that, you know, we need to evolve as a society. Actually, I started it off by calling out dates. You know, I said, you know, August 1st, August 31st, September 24th, May 30th, March 31st, June 19th. What are all of those? And people said, public holidays. I said, right. I said, you know, but I'm sure that when people think of public holidays, they think of long weekends, and we've had a lot this year, right? And everybody laughed because I said, yes, that will be checked when there's a public holiday, do we get a long weekend? I said, well, no, all of these dates are important dates in the evolution of our society, coming out of enslavement through indenture and up to freedom. And therefore, we have to understand the significance of those holidays as we have evolved. And I was making the point, therefore, that Trinidad and Tobago, our system of governance and our economic system have to evolve. And at that time, I was still using a BlackBerry, right? So I brought up my BlackBerry. I said, you know, I still have a BlackBerry, but I'm going to have to evolve at some point in time, because you can't run all your apps on a BlackBerry, far less on a Me Too, yes, and so on. So, in the same way that we understand that, and people know that they have to, sorry, I just need to. I hope I'm still there, right? Yeah, sorry, I had to just plug in my phone because the battery was getting a little on the weak side. My apologies. Let me just reset my thing so I'm not. Yeah, okay. Hopefully I'm still being seen. Okay. Yes. So in the same way that we evolve our technology, the systems of governance and our structures and institutions also need to evolve. And the point I was making is that the institutions that we have now, how the parliament is constructed, how the cabinet is constructed, and so on, how the judiciary is organized, our service commissions and the functions of those service commissions, all of which are part of the structure of the state. Those institutions are essentially the same as the colonial institutions, and therefore, even we became independent on August 31st, 1962, became a republic, and we mark Republic Day on the 24th of September, 1976. But the First Republic, yes, there was an advance on the Independence Constitution in some respects, but we need to evolve further because those institutions are not working. I mean, we were just giving some examples about how state boards function, that we need to evolve how we get appointments to state boards. We need to have party and campaign finance legislation. I mean, when I contested elections in 1976, which neither of you thought about at that time, right? Your parents didn't even know each other, I'm sure, in 1976. But when I contested elections, we literally just spent a couple $100 in our election campaign. Everybody who walked the streets did that totally voluntarily. We just bought some roti and some sweet drink for lunch and so on. The people who worked in the polling stations for us, our polling agents, you know, the party supporters cooked some food and carried for them, and we didn't have to pay for that. People used their cars and volunteered their cars. You didn't have to pay for transport and so on. There were no television ads and radio ads and big banners and posters and all of that. We just had some little paper posters that at night we went with a car and stuck them up using flour or starch or something like that. Very low budget campaign, right? Now it's millions, tens of millions of dollars of election campaign. Therefore, we need party finance law. We didn't need it then, but we need it now. So we have to evolve, right? The fact that you have ministers functioning as MPs, members of parliament, and ministers, so they have to attend parliamentary meetings. They have to attend joint select committees of the parliament. They have to attend to their ministerial business. They have to attend to their constituents' business. It's not possible for them to do all of that efficiently. And therefore, our parliamentary oversight committees meet once every now and then to deal with a particular company. So they may meet once a week, but during the course, so that they may meet 40 times for the year. But if you have 80 state enterprises, they're not going to be able to meet that state enterprise every year. They may meet one every 2 or 3 years. And therefore, there's no parliamentary oversight over those state enterprises on an ongoing basis. And therefore, you get decisions being made by state enterprises that are not good. So our parliamentary system is not functional. The Prime Minister is complaining about independent senators. Well, the way to deal with that is to fundamentally change the Constitution, not by attacking the President of the Republic. That's not appropriate. Or attacking independent senators as Kirk Mayhew did. That's not appropriate.
Exactly.
What we advocate is a differently constituted Senate where interest groups, by right, by law, by Constitution, have representatives in the Senate, what Lloyd Best called the macro Senate. So trade unions might have 5 senators, not chosen by the President in his or her own deliberate judgment, but chosen by the trade unions, nominated by trade unions, and appointed by the President. Yes? And if those senators don't function, then the trade unions will write the Senate President and say, the President of the Republic, and say, we want to change David and replace David with Jada and Naomi, and so on. So the trade unions have 5. The business groups have a certain number. The women's organizations, official, not any fly-by-night, but the official women's organization has, similarly with youth, similarly with culture, whether it's pan or chutney or calypso and so on, in the Senate. So when you see the Senate, you see reflected Trinidad and Tobago. And then the government now has to, so it's not Party A or Party B who are senators, but it is interest groups. So the government now has to persuade, because that's what politics is about. Politics is about pursuing your interests. So the government now, you bring a bill to the Senate, you therefore have to persuade those interest groups represented by their senators, persuade them as to the correctness of this piece of legislation or this policy measure, as the case may be. And therefore you persuade them on the basis of analysis and facts and so on, and not on the basis of who was PNM and who was UNC and who was MSJ and that kind of nonsense. So that changes the political culture, yes? And that is how we have to evolve. And that is what the Second Republic would look like. I'm just mentioning some elements of it.
Yes.
But there are many. And then you have to change the structure of the economy. So I'm mentioning some in terms of community cooperatives, so you create more wealth. there are many other things that we have identified in terms of changing the economic structure of the economy by way of activity. So we propose, for example, East Port of Spain, and perhaps we'll have to go and try to meet with the Minister of Trade and so on. East Port of Spain should become a heritage city, and recreate barrack yards where the calypso tents used to be, and where the pans were being created, and so we create that kind of environment. And so a cruise ship comes in and they go down into these areas and they see and get a feel of how pan evolved, or how it was created, and what was a calypso tent.
Yeah, we were actually talking about that same thing yesterday here in studio. Because other countries do it, say South American countries as well as Caribbean countries, they do that. And it would be a great thing if we could have that sort of protection of our heritage as well. But I know that we do have to begin to wrap up. But I wanted to ask you, as somebody who has been in politics for such a long time, is very knowledgeable, obviously, of the way our governing system works, can you tell me what's a message to a young voter who may be feeling a bit disillusioned with how TNT politics is right now, how the system of government is right now?
Yes, and I would say to them, and not to blow MSJ's trumpet, is that let us connect with what I call a revolution of the mind. This country needs a revolution of the mind. And that is what we are trying to get across to people, that we have to break out of the mold. In other words, our ideas about what politics is also needs to evolve from red and yellow, and to see the possibilities of fundamental change taking place, and so on. So, connect with us in different ways, and let us have those discussions. And if I could just stick in 2 advertisements, since you have me on for an hour, and I logged on at 6 o'clock this morning. So you've had me for a long time.
Yes.
So let me stick in 2 ads while I'm at it. So this coming Saturday, MSJ is having the first of our community outreach activities in Pitty Valley at the Simeon Road Youth Center, which is right opposite Sparrows Hideaway in Pitty Valley, Simeon Road. And it's not a political event, it is a community event where we are providing a number of services. So there'll be a mini health fair where we'll have nurses and doctors who could assist you with identifying what your health status is and to give you advice. We're not doing a whole range of diagnostic checks, tests and so on. That's not what we're doing, but you could get some good health advice and get an understanding of your health status. Secondly, we're going to have a legal advice. We have a number of young attorneys who are going to be present, who will be giving legal advice if you need it. Again, they're not going to take up your court matter, but they could give you legal advice. And all of this is free. We're going to also have financial advisors present to give people assistance with their financial planning, how you budget and that kind of thing, and how you could save, maybe through credit unions. NEDCO is going to be present, so NEDCO will offer advice in terms of starting a business and what NEDCO can support in terms of starting a business. And there'll be some other kinds of information, MSJ, our own information about workers' rights will be available. And I think we're also trying to get some pamphlets that government services, that people, or access to government grants and things like that, so people could have an idea of what is available through the government. So all of this is totally free, not a single cent. You just come, and this is from 2 to 5 p.m. at the Simeon Road Youth Center in Pitty Valley. And then on Sunday afternoon, we, MSJ, initiated, but in collaboration with other organizations, a public education, the first of several, that is going to be the lead up to Emancipation Day, public education around the whole anti-colonial, anti-imperialist struggle that is taking place in different parts of the world, given what is happening in Gaza. So this is going to be Sunday afternoon at the ODB2 building on Henry Street, Upper Henry Street, from 3 to 5 in the afternoon. We have a speaker who lives in Gaza who is going to be joining us by Zoom, we hope. We're going to have a recorded statement by someone who is working in Burkina Faso and the Sahel, and hopefully somebody who can join us by Zoom out of Burkina Faso to understand what's happening there. And we will also have other persons speaking about reparations. So this is MSJ in conjunction with the Black Agenda Project of David Mohammed, the New National Vision of Fuad Abubakar, the Caribbean Freedom Project with Shabaka Kambon, and the All Mansions of Rastafari, which is currently led by Bongo Greece. So 5 organizations coming together to raise consciousness in this month leading up to Emancipation Day around anti-colonial, anti-police struggles, what's happening in Cuba, and the U.S. attack against Cuba. I saw, for example, that some Cuban athletes, I think volleyballers, were supposed to go to a competition in Puerto Rico with denied visas by the United States government. I mean, it's gone down to that, you know, where, and we have to speak out against those things.
Yeah.
So this has been a very, yes, a lot of...
I invite people to come generally. You all come to the session on Sunday, 3 to 5.
This Sunday.
It'll be interesting. I know Sundays are the rest, but 3 to 5, come on. It'll be very interesting. And we're not live streaming it, because, you know, Trinidad will say if it's live stream, you could stay at home.
Yeah, no, that's true.
We want people to come out and engage in discussion on these things, yes. To come out and join us.
I mean, even on that, you can have a discussion about how we've gotten so comfortable with doing everything online. Never even really meeting in person. That would be an interesting conversation. But thanks so much, Mr. Abdullah, for joining us this morning. It was a lot to really talk about, and I wish we could take some of these issues and break it down further, especially you were talking about the Second Republic. I found that was really interesting. Interesting way to put things.
Yeah, Sean. For a starter, you could Google my TED Talk in I think it was 2019, where essentially that is what I was laying out the foundation and basis of the Second Republic. So you could take a look at it and then come back and interrogate me. You know, I love to be on your program.
Yes, we will look at it and then revisit.
Yeah. And we can even put some snippets from it as well, so we can send our conversation around that, because it's definitely something I'd like to dive into further, because it speaks to just to how we do everything in Trinidad, but politics, government, it goes into the economy, it goes into social work. It's a great conversation, really nice conversation to have. Do you recommend somebody else to come on, maybe a featured speaker, to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, there are people who speak about constitution reform, right? And the need for us to have constitution reform. But often they don't necessarily speak about transforming the economic structures of the country in terms, and so the Second Republic really is to incorporate, you're right, Jada, transformation of the system of governance, constitution, the structure of our economy, and also social relations. We have to change the relations of power, political power, economic power, and social power. And relations of social power being changed has to do with patriarchy, it has to do with how we treat with children, and so on. So the whole issue, for example, of school violence and how we deal with that, all of that is incorporated in the Second Republic. And I may not have identified all of that in the TED Talk because I had limited time, but our understanding of ourselves, of our history, and so on. So different people speak to different aspects of it, identity. Some may speak to the issue of how we deal with social relations, some deal with political, some deal with economic. But I don't know that they've all put it together in one package. And that is why we talk about the Second Republic, that we have to evolve to a completely new set of arrangements of relationships in this country.
So thank you so much, Mr. Abdullah. We have to wrap now.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Also, always a pleasure. I do hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, and same to you.
Thanks so much. All right, so that brings us to the end of AM Prime this morning. As always, you know, you can engage with us on everything, WESNCC, WESNTV. You can DM either Naomi and I on Instagram as well. You can WhatsApp the number that you see on your screen, 682-9376, 682-9376, and tell us anything that you would like to hear going about in the future.
Yes, we're always open to suggestions. So do that. So as we close, the most wasted of days is one without laughter. This is a quote by E.E. Cummings, and I love it. I think it's actually a proven fact. If you smile long enough, you'll eventually laugh. So if there's nothing that makes you laugh today, well, just fake a smile and it'll eventually turn into laughter. You know,
I like the idea of laughter. I'm going to have a lot more laughter in my days, especially today. I'm going to choose to, somebody come at me, somebody get a bad drive, somebody, so I just going to laugh it off. I look crazy, but I laugh it off.
Yeah, so let's just keep that in mind today. Stay safe, stay inspired, stay informed. Don't forget to smile long enough, and you'll laugh. Don't go too far, stay close by, because we have Sean Michael Small on the hour with Talking Point.
And if you could head to our Instagram, he'll be giving a little update on what it is he's talking about for this show. So go onto our Instagram, WESN CC now, so you can see what we're doing over there. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys, so take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Dr. Joanne Williams-Carroll, and I am the Director of Behavioral and Mental Health at the Community Hospital. At the Community Hospital, we believe in nurturing mind, body, and soul. Through our counseling and chaplaincy program, we will provide you with support and strength you need to help with your mental and emotional well-being. Give us a call.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Struggling with heart health or frequent migraines? Discover the simple steps to reclaim your energy and vitality.
We're diving into a topic that affects about 422 million people around the world: diabetes.
Tune into Wellness Unlocked, the series that delivers expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and well-being. Your health matters. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.